The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her medical bag for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking each instrument, each bandage, each vial of medication. The routine had become second nature over her 5 years as a Navy SEAL team medic, but today felt different. Today, something in the air seemed heavier, more charged with anticipation. Team 7 was preparing for their most challenging mission yet, a rescue operation deep in hostile territory where every second would count and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah had been with this team through countless missions, and they trusted her completely. To them, she was Doc Chen, the quiet medic who never missed a shot with her sidearm and never lost a patient under fire. What they didn't know was that Sarah carried wounds that ran deeper than any battlefield injury she had ever treated. Commander Jake Morrison approached her station, his weathered face showing the concern of a leader who cared deeply about his team. "Doc, you ready for this one? Intel suggests we might be walking into a mess out there." Sarah looked up, her dark eyes meeting his steady gaze. "Always ready, Commander. Medical supplies are stocked, trauma kits are prepped, and I've got enough morphine to put down a horse if needed." Her voice carried the calm confidence that had earned her the respect of every man on the team. Morrison nodded, but something in her expression made him pause. In all their time together, he had noticed that Sarah had a way of becoming very still when the conversation turned to certain topics. She never talked about her past, never mentioned family, never shared the kind of personal stories that helped bond a team together during long deployments. The other team members had their theories, of course. Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, was convinced she came from a military family and had something to prove. Johnson, their communications specialist, thought she was running from a bad relationship. Thompson, the sniper, believed she had lost someone close in combat and joined the SEALs to honor their memory. None of them were close to the truth. As the team gathered for their final briefing, Sarah took her usual position in the back corner of the room. She preferred to observe, to listen, to absorb every detail that might help her keep her teammates alive. The mission was complex: infiltrate a compound where 3 American journalists were being held, neutralize the threats, and extract the hostages with minimal casualties. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the team's youngest member, was visibly nervous. This would be only his 3rd real combat mission, and Sarah had noticed his hands shaking slightly as he checked his weapon. During training exercises, she had quietly begun positioning herself where she could keep an eye on him, knowing that inexperienced operators were more likely to make mistakes that could get themselves or others killed. "Doc," Webb whispered as the briefing continued, "what if I freeze up out there? What if I can't do what needs to be done?" Sarah turned to look at the young man, seeing something of herself in his worried expression. "You've trained for this, Webb. Your body knows what to do even if your mind is racing. Trust your training, trust your team, and remember that fear is just your brain trying to keep you alive. Use it. Don't let it use you." Her words seemed to calm him, and Sarah felt the familiar mix of protectiveness and determination that came with being responsible for other people's lives. What Webb didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah understood fear in ways that went far beyond normal combat anxiety. The briefing concluded with Morrison assigning positions and reviewing emergency protocols. Sarah would accompany the main assault team while maintaining radio contact with their extraction point. If anyone went down, she would be responsible for keeping them alive long enough to get them home. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Rodriguez approached Sarah's station. "Hey, Doc, I've been thinking about getting a tattoo when we get back from this mission. Something to commemorate the team, you know? You got any ink?" Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment as she packed her medical supplies. "No tattoos," she said simply, then resumed her work with renewed focus. Rodriguez persisted, not noticing the slight tension in her shoulders. "Come on, Doc. Everyone's got something. Thompson's got that eagle on his arm, Johnson's got his kids' names, I've got my hometown coordinates. What's your story?" "Some stories are better left untold," Sarah replied, zipping up her bag with more force than necessary. The dismissive tone was unusual for her, and Rodriguez backed off, but not before sharing a meaningful look with Thompson. They had all learned to recognize when Doc Chen was closing a door on a conversation, and they had all learned not to push those doors. What they didn't understand was that behind Sarah's professional calm lay memories that could destroy everything she had built. Memories of a different life, a different war, and choices that haunted her every time she closed her eyes. As night fell and the team prepared to move out, Sarah checked her gear one final time. Her medical supplies were organized with military precision, her weapons were clean and loaded, and her mind was focused on the mission ahead. But in the quiet moments between preparation and action, images flashed through her consciousness like fragments of a nightmare she could never fully escape. The sound of helicopter rotors brought her back to the present. It was time to go. Time to once again put her life on the line for her teammates and for strangers who needed their help. As she climbed aboard the transport aircraft, Sarah caught Morrison's eye and gave him a slight nod, the same gesture she had given before every mission for 5 years. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the mission would take them into territory that bore an uncomfortable resemblance to places Sarah had been before, under very different circumstances. Tonight, she would be forced to confront parts of her past that she had spent years trying to forget. The aircraft lifted off into the darkness, carrying Team 7 toward their objective. Sarah stared out the small window at the landscape passing below, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. In a few hours, they would be deep in hostile territory, depending on each other for survival. What she couldn't know was that this mission would strip away the carefully constructed walls she had built around her history, forcing her to reveal secrets that would change how her teammates saw her forever. The woman they knew as Doc Chen, the steady medic who never flinched under pressure, was about to come face to face with the girl she used to be. And that girl had blood on her hands that no amount of time or good deeds could ever wash clean. The helicopter carrying Team 7 disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind the safety of the base and heading toward a confrontation that would test not only their tactical skills, but also the bonds of trust that held them together. Sarah Chen sat in the darkness, surrounded by men who would die for her without question, carrying secrets that could destroy everything she had worked to build. In the distance, enemy territory waited like a mouthful of teeth, ready to devour anyone foolish enough to enter unprepared. But the greatest danger Sarah faced wasn't from enemy bullets or hostile forces. The greatest danger was the possibility that her past might finally catch up with her, forcing her to choose between the life she had built and the truth she had spent so long running from. The mission was about to begin, but for Sarah Chen, the real battle had been raging inside her head for much longer than anyone could imagine. The compound appeared through the pre-dawn mist like a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire. Team 7 had been moving through enemy territory for 6 hours, covering 12 miles of rough terrain while avoiding patrol routes and surveillance cameras. Now they crouched in a dried riverbed 300 yards from their target, studying the building where 3 American journalists were being held. Sarah adjusted her night vision goggles and counted the guards she could see patrolling the perimeter. 12 visible, probably 6 more inside, all heavily armed and alert. The intelligence briefing had been accurate. This wouldn't be an easy extraction. "Doc, you see that guard tower on the northeast corner?" Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. "That's your responsibility if things go sideways. Clear line of sight to our extraction point." Sarah nodded, checking her rifle one more time. Marksmanship had always been one of her strengths. though she preferred to think of her weapon as a tool for protecting her teammates rather than taking lives. Still, she understood that sometimes violence was the only language that hostile forces understood. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Johnson would disable the communications array while Rodriguez created a distraction with carefully placed explosives on the south wall. Thompson would provide overwatch from an elevated position, while Morrison, Webb, and Sarah breached the main building to locate and extract the hostages. As they waited for the signal to begin their assault, Sarah found herself studying the compound's architecture. The thick concrete walls, the narrow windows positioned for defensive fire. The way the buildings were arranged to create killing fields for defenders. It all looked disturbingly familiar. Too familiar. Memories began bleeding through her carefully maintained mental barriers. Another compound, another country, another war. She had been much younger then, barely 18, with different loyalties and a different understanding of right and wrong. The weight of the rifle in her hands felt exactly the same, but everything else about who she was had changed completely. "Doc, you okay?" Webb's whispered question brought her back to the present. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah forced herself to focus on her teammate's concerned face. "Just running through medical scenarios in my head. Want to be ready for whatever we find in there." It wasn't entirely a lie. She was thinking about medical procedures, about the trauma care she might need to provide if the mission went wrong. But she was also thinking about other things, darker things that she had sworn never to remember. The radio crackled to life with Morrison's voice. "All units, this is actual. Commence operation in 60 seconds. Remember, we're here for the journalists, not to start a war. Clean and quiet if possible, loud and fast if necessary." Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time, her hands moving through the familiar ritual of inventory and organization. Bandages, antibiotics, morphine, emergency surgical tools. Everything she might need to keep someone alive long enough to reach proper medical care. In her other gear pouches, she carried ammunition, grenades, and a sidearm that had saved her life more times than she cared to count. The dichotomy had never felt more stark. Healer and killer, protector and destroyer, the person she was now and the person she used to be. 30 seconds, Morrison announced. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way she had learned during years of meditation and therapy. The breathing exercises helped calm her heart rate and clear her mind, but they couldn't completely silence the voices from her past that were growing louder with each passing minute. 10 seconds. All units stand by. The compound in front of them could have been any military installation in any war zone around the world, but to Sarah, it looked exactly like the place where her childhood had ended and her nightmares had begun. The place where she had learned that survival sometimes required doing things that would haunt you for the rest of your life. Execute, execute, execute. The night erupted into controlled chaos. Rodriguez's explosives lit up the south wall in a brilliant flash of orange and white, sending chunks of concrete flying through the air. The guards immediately began shouting and running toward the source of the explosion, exactly as planned. Johnson's electronic warfare equipment disabled their communications in a burst of static that left the defenders blind and unable to coordinate their response. Thompson's rifle spoke twice from his overwatch position, dropping 2 guards who had maintained their posts instead of responding to the distraction. Sarah followed Morrison and Webb through the gap Rodriguez had created in the compound's defenses, her medical training automatically cataloging potential hazards and injury risks as they moved. The building's interior was a maze of narrow corridors and reinforced doors, designed to slow down attackers and create ambush opportunities. But Sarah knew this type of layout, understood the tactical thinking behind it. She had helped design similar defensive positions years ago in a different war for different reasons. "Hostiles 12 o'clock. Webb called out, raising his weapon. Sarah saw them at the same time. 3 armed men moving to block their advance toward the center of the building. Morrison was already in motion, his years of experience showing in the fluid way he engaged the threat. Webb followed his lead, his earlier nervousness replaced by the focused calm of a professional operator. The firefight was brief but intense. Sarah provided covering fire while her teammates maneuvered to better positions, her shots precise and economical. She tried not to think about the men she was shooting at, tried to focus only on protecting Morrison and Webb. But as one of the hostile fighters fell, crying out in a language she recognized, Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. The language was Arabic, the same dialect she had spoken fluently during her previous life. For a moment, she wasn't Doc Chen, respected Navy SEAL medic. She was someone else entirely, someone she had tried very hard to forget. "Doc, movement on our 6, Morrison called out, snapping her back to the present danger. Sarah spun around to see 2 more fighters attempting to flank their position. Her training took over, muscle memory guiding her weapon as she engaged the new threat. But even as she fought, part of her mind was somewhere else, remembering another firefight in another place where the stakes had been just as high, but the sides had been reversed. They pushed deeper into the compound, following intelligence reports that placed the hostages in a secure room near the building's center. Sarah's medical expertise proved valuable as they encountered wounded defenders. She was able to quickly assess which ones posed a continuing threat and which ones were too injured to fight. The journalists they came to rescue were found exactly where intelligence had indicated, locked in a reinforced storage room that had been converted into a makeshift prison. All 3 were alive but showed signs of rough treatment, dehydration, minor injuries, and the hollow-eyed look of people who had expected to die in captivity. "American military," Morrison announced as they breached the door. "We're here to take you home." Sarah immediately began assessing the hostage's medical condition, while Morrison and Webb established a defensive perimeter. The journalists were weak but mobile, which would make extraction easier. She administered IV fluids to the most dehydrated captive and bandaged several minor wounds. "Ma'am, are you really Navy SEALs?" one of the journalists asked, staring at Sarah with a mixture of relief and amazement. "Yes, sir. Just focus on staying with us and doing exactly what we tell you. We'll have you out of here soon." But even as she spoke reassuring words to the rescued hostages, Sarah could feel the walls of her carefully constructed identity beginning to crumble. The compound, the language, the tactical situation. Everything was triggering memories she had spent years suppressing. The extraction route back to their helicopter landing zone took them through parts of the compound Sarah recognized with uncomfortable clarity. Rooms that looked identical to places where she had spent months of her life. Corridors that could have been lifted directly from her nightmares. As they moved through the darkness, carrying the rescued journalist toward safety, Sarah found herself wondering if the past could ever truly be escaped. She had thought that 5 years of honorable service, 5 years of saving lives instead of taking them, might be enough to balance the scales of her personal history. But tonight was proving that some debts could never be fully paid, some sins could never be completely forgiven. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Sarah sensed that her teammates were about to learn exactly who she really was and what she had done before she became the person they trusted with their lives. The helicopter extraction point was still 2 miles away, through hostile territory filled with people who wanted them dead. But for Sarah Chen, the most dangerous part of the journey was the one happening inside her own mind, where the past and present were colliding with explosive force. Behind them, the compound burned against the night sky, sending columns of smoke into the darkness. Ahead lay the promise of safety and success. But Sarah knew that some battles could never be won, only postponed, and her reckoning was coming whether she was ready for it or not. The helicopter touched down exactly on schedule, its rotor wash whipping sand and debris across the extraction zone. Team 7 had successfully completed their mission. 3 American journalists rescued, minimal casualties, no team members seriously injured. By every tactical measure, the operation had been a complete success. But as Sarah helped load the rescued hostages into the aircraft, she could feel something fundamental shifting inside her chest. The familiar weight of unspoken secrets felt heavier than usual, as if the night's events had somehow loosened the locks she had placed on her memory. During the flight back to base, one of the journalists, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Monroe, kept staring at Sarah with obvious curiosity. Finally, as they crossed into friendly airspace, Monroe leaned over and spoke in a voice only Sarah could hear. "I know you," she said quietly. "Not from tonight, from before." Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She met Monroe's gaze and saw recognition there, the kind of recognition that could destroy everything she had built over the past 5 years. "I think you have me confused with someone else, ma'am," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. Monroe shook her head slowly. "Syria, 2018. You were much younger then, and you wore different clothes. But I never forget a face, especially not faces I see through a camera lens." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Patricia Monroe was an investigative journalist who specialized in conflict reporting. If she had been in Syria in 2018, if she had photographs from that time, then Sarah's carefully constructed new identity was about to crumble into dust. "I was covering the Civil War," Monroe continued, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. "There was this young woman, couldn't have been more than 18, who was working with one of the opposition groups. Brilliant tactical mind, spoke perfect English and Arabic, absolutely lethal with a rifle. The fighters called her the Ghost because she could appear and disappear like smoke." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She glanced toward her teammates, who were focused on their own post-mission routines, unaware that their medic's entire world was collapsing. "You're mistaken," Sarah said firmly. "I've never been to Syria." Monroe studied her for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be archived photos. She showed Sarah an image that made her stomach drop through the floor of the helicopter. It was her, 5 years younger, wearing the distinctive black head wrap and tactical vest of the Free Syrian Army. She was kneeling beside a wounded fighter, providing medical care in what appeared to be a bombed-out building. The angle of the photo showed her face clearly, leaving no room for denial. "You saved a lot of lives during that war," Monroe said softly, "but you also took quite a few. I have pictures of that too." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 5 years' worth of carefully maintained lies pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, she saw Monroe watching her with something that might have been sympathy. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Monroe replied, "at least not from you. I'm a journalist, not a blackmailer. But I am curious about how someone who fought in the Syrian Civil War ended up as a Navy SEAL medic." Before Sarah could respond, Morrison's voice crackled through the helicopter's comm system. "All team members report to debriefing room 7 immediately upon landing. Outstanding work tonight, people. Clean mission, successful extraction, everyone goes home safe." The helicopter settled onto the landing pad at their base with a gentle bump, and Sarah felt time running out. Monroe was gathering her equipment, preparing to be transferred to a different facility for intelligence debriefing. Soon, she would be out of Sarah's reach, carrying knowledge that could end her military career and possibly put her in prison. As the team disembarked, Thompson approached Sarah with a grin on his weathered face. "Hell of a shot on that guard tower, Doc. Remind me never to get on your bad side." Sarah managed a weak smile, but inside she was calculating how long she had before Monroe's story reached the wrong ears. Military intelligence would want to know everything about her background, her training, her activities during the Syrian conflict. There would be investigations, interrogations, and eventually the truth would come out. The truth that Sarah Chen, respected Navy SEAL medic, had spent 2 years fighting alongside Syrian opposition forces. The truth that she had killed dozens of people, some of them possibly American allies. The truth that she had entered the United States under false pretenses and built her entire identity on a foundation of lies. In the debriefing room, Morrison went through the standard post-mission protocols while Sarah sat in the back corner, her mind racing through possible escape plans. She could disappear tonight, use skills learned in Syria to vanish completely before anyone realized she was gone. She had money hidden in several different accounts, false documents that would get her across the Canadian border, contacts who would help her start over again. But looking around the room at her teammates, Sarah realized she couldn't do it. These men had become her family, the first real family she had known since fleeing her home country as a teenager. They trusted her completely, depended on her to keep them alive, believed in the person she had pretended to be. "Doc, you're awfully quiet tonight," Rodriguez observed. "Everything okay?" Sarah looked up to find all 5 team members watching her with concern. These were men who had faced death together countless times, who knew each other's moods and habits better than most married couples. They could sense that something was wrong, even if they couldn't identify exactly what it was. "Just tired," she said. "Long night, high stress. I'll be fine after some sleep." Morrison studied her face for a moment, his experienced eyes noting details that others might miss. "Doc, if something's bothering you, we need to know about it. Team cohesion depends on trust and communication." The irony of his words hit Sarah like a slap. Trust and communication, the 2 things she had been systematically avoiding for 5 years. She had built her entire relationship with these men on deception, and now that deception was about to destroy everything. "There's something I need to tell you all," she heard herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. The room went completely silent. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from concerned to alert. The other team members exchanged glances, sensing that whatever Sarah was about to reveal would change everything. "Before I joined the Navy, before I became a medic, I was someone else, someone I've spent the last 5 years trying to forget." Sarah stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, turning to face her teammates directly. If she was going to confess, she would do it properly, with the honesty and courage they deserved. "My real name is Zahra al-Rashid. I was born in Damascus, Syria. When the Civil War started, I was 15 years old and my parents were killed in a government artillery strike. I spent the next 3 years fighting with the Free Syrian Army." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah could see the shock on her teammates' faces, the way they were processing this information and trying to reconcile it with the person they thought they knew. "I was trained as both a medic and a sniper," she continued. "I saved lives when I could, but I also took lives when I had to. By the time I was 18, I had killed more than 40 people, most of them Syrian government forces, but some of them foreign advisors and contractors." Morrison's voice was carefully controlled when he finally spoke. "How did you get into the United States?" "Refugee resettlement program. I had enough medical training to qualify for accelerated placement, and I spoke fluent English. The screening process wasn't as thorough then as it is now. I lied about my combat experience, created a cover story about being a medical student who had fled the fighting." Webb looked like he was going to be sick. "Doc, are you telling us that you're an enemy combatant?" "Former enemy combatant," Sarah corrected. "I haven't had contact with any Syrian opposition groups since I arrived in the United States. I joined the Navy because I wanted to serve something larger than myself, to use my skills to protect innocent people instead of killing for political causes." Thompson shook his head slowly. "This is insane. Do you realize what kind of position you've put us in? We've been carrying classified equipment and sensitive information on missions with someone who's essentially a foreign agent." "I'm not a foreign agent," Sarah said firmly. "I'm an American citizen who made a choice to serve this country with everything I have. Every mission we've completed together, every life I've saved, every time I've put myself between you and danger, that was real. That was genuine. The only lie was where I came from." Morrison stood up, his command presence filling the room. "Doc, I need you to understand something. What you've just told us isn't just about trust or team dynamics. This is a matter of national security. There are protocols for handling situations like this, and those protocols don't include keeping secrets." Sarah nodded, having expected this response. "I know. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my deception. But before you make your reports, before the investigations begin, I need you to know something else." She reached into her medical bag and pulled out a small digital device that none of them had seen before. Tonight's mission wasn't random. The compound we hit, the tactical layout, the defensive positions, I recognized all of it because I helped design similar installations during the war. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Morrison stepped closer, his expression intense. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that the people holding those journalists weren't random terrorists. They were using Syrian army tactics and defensive strategies that I'm familiar with because I fought against them for 3 years. Someone with serious military training was advising them, someone who understood how to create killing fields and establish overlapping fields of fire." Johnson leaned forward in his chair. "Are you suggesting there's a larger operation at work here?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Based on what I saw tonight, I believe we interrupted something much bigger than a simple kidnapping. The compound was too sophisticated, too well defended for a standard hostage situation. I think we stumbled into a training facility where foreign fighters were learning advanced tactical techniques." The implications of her statement were staggering. If Sarah was correct, then their rescue mission had uncovered evidence of a much larger threat, one that could have serious implications for national security. Morrison was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he had heard. Finally, he looked directly at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "Doc, or Zara, or whoever you really are, you've put us in an impossible situation, but you've also potentially provided intelligence that could save a lot of American lives. I'm going to have to report this up the chain of command, but I'm going to recommend that any investigation into your background be handled by people who understand the bigger picture." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. Her secret was out, but her teammates hadn't immediately rejected her. The consequences would still come, but at least she wouldn't face them alone. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "The journalist, Patricia Monroe. She recognized me from Syria. She has photographs that could corroborate everything I've told you." Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course she does, because this night couldn't get any more complicated." As the team began to discuss the practical implications of Sarah's revelations, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. The strange relief that came with telling the truth. The weight of her secrets was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden she had to carry alone. Whatever happened next, whatever investigations and consequences followed, at least she would face them as herself. Not as the perfect medic she had pretended to be, but as the flawed, complicated, haunted person she really was. Team 7 had always prided itself on being able to handle any mission, overcome any obstacle, adapt to any challenge. Now they would find out if their bonds were strong enough to survive the revelation that one of their own had been living a lie for 5 years. The mission was over, but Sarah's real test was just beginning.